In my last tutorial, someone in the comments, shout out to NunyoBiz5973, asked if I could show how to set up local multiplayer using Unity's new input system. Today, that's exactly what we're doing. I'll walk you through how to support up to 4 players on the same screen using both shared keyboard controls and gamepads, step by step. Whether you're making a party game or a couch co-op brawler, or just want to experiment with local input, you're in the right place. If you guys like tutorials like this, hit subscribe. I post Unity tutorials like this every week. Thanks. As usual, we're going to start with the Unity Hub. We're going to select Unity version 6.1. We'll name our project Local Multiplayer Tutorial. We'll go ahead and disconnect it from Unity Cloud, and we'll hit Create Project. All right, with our new project created, we'll go to Edit, Project Settings, Player, and then scroll down to Active Input Handling. Here you should see Input System Package New. If you don't see that, you can either set it to both or new. Make sure it's not on legacy or old. If you don't have the input system installed, go to Window Package Manager, select Unity Registry, and type Input System. You'll have one option and you'll have an install button here. The next thing we're going to do is create an input actions asset file. So we'll right click on assets in our project window, go to create and go down to input actions. We'll call this multiplayer input. With that created, we'll double click on it to edit. We're going to add an action map in the left side, hit the plus key, name this gameplay. Under new action, the default new action that's already there, we'll rename that to move. We'll add a second action, call this one jump. We'll switch move from action type button to value. We'll select control type and change that to vector 2. We'll select no binding. We'll pull the drop down for path and go to gamepad, left stick. Then we'll click on the plus next to move and we'll add an up, down, left, right composite. We'll do that one more time, an up, down, left, right composite. And the first one we'll rename to WASD. The second one we'll name arrows. We'll expand WASD. We'll select the up key binding, go to path, type W. Select W keyboard. We'll do the same for the rest. That completed, we'll go to arrows and expand that. For arrows up, we'll select path, hit listen, we'll hit the up arrow key. Select up arrow keyboard. Okay, now we'll add bindings for jump. First one we can add is gamepad button south. We'll add a new binding to jump. We'll set this binding to spacebar. We'll type the word space and select space keyboard. We'll add a new binding under jump. We'll hit listen. We'll hit the right control key. And we'll select right control keyboard. Save your asset. Now we need to set up control schemes to separate different inputs for different players. So we'll go to control schemes on the top left. We'll hit add control scheme. First one is called gamepad. Under device type, hit the plus, we'll find gamepad, click that, and then gamepad again, hit save. We'll add a new control scheme, we'll call this one WASD, hit plus, select keyboard twice, hit save. Once again, we'll add a control scheme, we'll call this arrows, hit the plus key, hit keyboard twice, and hit save. Now we have to assign all our key bindings to the different control schemes. So left stick is a gamepad, button south is a gamepad. Now WASD, we'll select all of those for WASD here, and then arrows are part of the arrows control scheme. Under jump, select space and assign that to WASD. Select right control and assign that to arrows. Now you can hit save asset and close the input actions editor. Now update our scene and create our player prefab. We'll right click in the hierarchy window, select 3D object, add a plane. We'll call this ground. We're going to scale the ground on the X to 10, 1, and 10. Now we'll create our player. So right click in the hierarchy, go to 3D object, select capsule. We'll call this player. We're going to reset the transform by right-clicking on the transform component title bar and hit reset. On the Y, we'll move it up to 1. I'm going to collapse all of the components and I'll add a player input component. Under actions, I'm going to drag the multiplayer input from the project window into the actions slot. I'll make sure that auto switch is not checked on and the default game map is gameplay. Under behavior, I'll set send messages to invoke Unity events. Next, I'm going to add a character controller. Now I'm going to create a new folder in the project's window. I'll right click on assets, I'll go to create, I'll select folder. I'm going to make this folder called scripts, and then I'm going to right click on scripts, I'll hit create, select mono behavior script, and I'm going to call this player controller. Select my player and assign player controller in the inspector. I'm going to right click on assets, I'll go to create, select folder, and name this prefabs. Now I'm going to drag my player game object into the prefabs folder. Let's edit our player controller. So double click on the player controller file, I've sped through the player controller setup here because it's covered in more detail in my input tutorial. You can also download it from the description below. And now we have our player controller completed. We'll go back to Unity, and in our player prefab, which we can delete out of our scene, and then double click on the player prefab in the project window under prefabs. We'll double click and that'll open our prefab up in a special window. We can go to player input, events, gameplay, and find move. We'll add a plus there and drag our player controller into the slot. Under no function, go to player controller and select move. We'll do the same thing for jump. We'll add a new slot. We'll drag our player controller into the slot. We'll drop down new function, find player controller, and select jump. Let's remove the player from the scene. Now let's create a new game object. We'll create an empty and we'll call this PlayerInputManager. We're going to add a component to this called PlayerInputManager. We'll drop our prefab into the PlayerInputManager. Under join behavior, join players manually. We'll limit the number of players to 4. Now let's create a new script by right-clicking on the project window under scripts. Go to create, select mono behavior script. We'll call this PlayerInputManager. We'll attach our PlayerInputManager to our PlayerInput game object, and we'll double-click it to open it in Visual Studio. We'll start off by adding some properties. We'll make 2 serialized fields. This one is private game object player prefab. The next one is a serialized field, private transform array spawn points. Now we'll create 2 private properties, private bool WASD joined equals false, private bool arrows joined equals false. We'll remove the start method by deleting it. We'll add our code and update. We'll add if keyboard. We'll hit enter so that it adds our using statement. Current equals null, then return. When you add keyboard, you want to make sure that it adds a using statement Unity engine.input system. Now we'll deal with WASD joining. If not WASD joined and keyboard.current.space key.was pressed this frame, then we're going to set var player equal to player input dot instantiate player prefab comma control scheme colon WASD in quotes pair with device colon keyboard.current, and then we'll set a spawn point. If spawn points.length is greater than 0, then player.transform.position equals spawn points 0.position. WASD joined equals true. This finds the spawn point, sets the player's position equal to a spawn point. We'll see this later. Now let's deal with arrow keys. Now we'll deal with gamepads. For each var gamepad in gamepad.all, if gamepad.button.south.was pressed this frame, player input.instantiate player prefab, comma, control scheme, gamepad, pair with device, gamepad. Control S to save. Now let's go back to Unity. Let's drag our player prefab into the player prefab slot on the PlayerInputManager script. Now let's create some spawn points. Right click in the hierarchy, go to create empty. We'll name this spawn points. Now right click on spawn points, create a new empty. We'll call this point 1. Hit Control D and then rename this point 2. Let's move point 1 over to 5 on the X. Let's select point 2 and we'll hit -5 on the X. Let's save this and let's test it. We'll hit play. In the game window, we'll hit spacebar. We'll move right and left with WASD. And then we'll hit right control. And we'll move with the arrow keys. And then we'll hit south button and we'll move with the joystick. You can see we have an error. We can continue creating new gamepad objects. So let's stop this. We'll go back to PlayerInputManager and let's add a new Boolean. Private bool gamepad joined equals false. If gamepad button south was pressed, and not gamepad joined. After instantiating, we'll say gamepad joined equals true. Let's go back to Unity and test. Let's hit the south button on the gamepad. Let's do that again. There we go. That problem is fixed. Now we can see we're not using the spawn points. So let's select our PlayerInputManager. Let's expand our spawn points, and we'll drag our spawn point 1 in, and then we'll drag our spawn point 2 in. Hit play again. We'll expand the game window by double clicking on the title tab. Hit spacebar, and then I'll hit right control. Okay, and then I'll hit the south button. And that's it, a flexible, clean setup for local multiplayer in Unity 6 using the input system and a character controller. You've got keyboard splits, manual joins, and scalable input for up to 4 players. You can find project files and downloads below in the description. You can join my Unity 101 Bootcamp waitlist for beginner-friendly in-depth training, which I'm working on right now. And of course, if you like this video and want to see more like it, like and subscribe, and join our dev Discord or Patreon if this helped. All right, catch you next time.